All of your actions are being recorded in a book. Who will live, who will die,
I'm going to say life,
etc. All right. So we'll get to it. Welcome everyone to Tuesday Night Talmud. Most explosive night of Talmud, not on TikTok, on the internet. We have to be honest in our grandeur. And
she was all worked up yesterday.
I didn't see the yesterday. Oh, I thought I had the page loaded. Hold on one second.
who was all worked up?
The Daf Yomi girl.
Oh,
So we're in the Gemara Megillah, and we're going to do a good sugya tonight. One that we may finish tonight. I don't know. I say that for years now. But there is a good. You will understand something if we do it right. You'll understand something at the end of tonight that really has perplexed me for a long time. And different sidurim give different instructions, which is the reading on the last day of Pesach and the second day of Shavuos and on Shmini Atzeres and on the second day of Sukkot, which is Kol HaBechor or Aser to Aser. It's these two different readings that are right in the same spot, but some days you start in one spot and other days you start in another spot. And I don't know, I was always confused as to why. And there are different customs. For example, Koren and Art Scroll, the official Sidurim of the modern Orthodox community, with apologies to the new RCA Siddur. They revised the De Sola Pool, but that just didn't. It's good. It's a really good Siddur. The comments are better than the others, but it just hasn't taken. So I don't know even what that says, but you should check it out. It's a great Siddur. In any event, we're gonna get there.
Yeah. That's the one I grew up with.
Yeah, no, it's a great Siddur, and they took that model. Actually, they published the old De Sola Pool with Koren with a totally revised commentary. So it's like neither here nor there. It's like a mashup or a crossover Siddur, as you might call it. Okay, so we had finished last time this statement about God's humility, and God's humility was tied to all the places it was mentioned, which included the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. In every spot was tied to God helping those who were in unfortunate situations. And so here, God's greatness became tied to God's humility. And then we spoke about how liturgically this is added to the end of Vayitem Lecha in the Ashkenazic Nusach, which we talked about a bit about why. So we'll pick up. Yeah. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag.
Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. That's 31 Amud Bet.
Yeah. So I apologize. We're on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, 31a.
Yeah. A. So okay, Aleph.
In the old-fashioned Gemara.
Lamed Aleph what?
Lamed Aleph.
Lamed Aleph. Lamed Aleph A, you said?
Yeah, Lamed Aleph is A.
No.
Yeah, Lamed Aleph Aleph.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're right after that passage about Dayan Almanot. So Osa Mishpat Yatom V'Yamana Shanoi Benevim Kolmar Ram B'Nisha Shochana B'Gadosh V'Gomer. In the wide lines at the bottom of the page, if you're in an old-fashioned Gemara, etc. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. Right
yeah,
there.
I got that. Okay, 14.
Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. Great.
Yep.
Just give me 1 second. Okay. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. Going to Parshas Moado Shev B'Toras Kohanim, Maftirin Hine Yom Ba Lashem. So what day is this? We're talking about Sukkot.
First day Sukkot.
First day of Sukkot. And on the first day of Sukkot, what do we read? We read the portion of the festivals in Vayikra and Leviticus. And for the Maftir, we do Zechariah 14:1. And what is Zechariah 14:1, pray tell? Well, we can click and see it. Does everyone see it? It's magic. I really like that. Okay, here it is. So in this passage, Zechariah prophesies about the future war at the end of days for Jerusalem, the kind of messianic end times. And if you go to Tet Zion, according to my notes, Tet, I took some notes here about this. Yes, he says, "V'haya kol hanosar mikol hagoyim habayim Yisrael v'alu midei shana b'shana v'shtakavos l'melech Hashem tzvakos v'lachog es chag haSukkos." The famous prophecy. In the end of days, after everything is done, and whoever's left among the nations, meaning whoever hasn't, been wiped out in this war, will come to Jerusalem year after year to bow before the King, the Lord of hosts, and to celebrate the festival of Sukkot. And whoever doesn't come, they will not have rain. Whoever does not come will not have rain. So this makes sense. Okay, right. And it goes on. And if Egypt doesn't come, they're going to have a plague, etc. So what does that Haftorah add to Sukkot that maybe the Torah reading doesn't have? I just want to delve into it a little because they were choosing things that augmented different aspects of the holiday, and they're choosing to feature one aspect over another in every situation. There are many choices. So they are tying into the 70, there's a rabbinic tradition, right, of tying in the Gemara, and you see this manifest that on Sukkot, there are 70 parim, cows offering. If you combine the parim of each of the Musaf offerings, right? What is it, 13 and 12 and 11 and 10 and 9, they go down each day. So the Parei HaChag add up to 70, which are supposed to represent, in rabbinic thinking, the 70 kind of primordial nations of the world. And so they're emphasizing, they're taking the korbanot HaChag, the sacrifices, and they're adding the universalist message of Sukkot, the messianic idea of Sukkot, and the rain. They're adding the rain. So they're adding a couple of themes in there. Yes, messianism and future redemption. That like the sukkah is like the Sukkot David Hanofalet, the fallen sukkah of David rebuilt. This idea of the sukkah as representing almost like the temple and rebuilt Jerusalem. They're adding in the idea of sukkah as a time where nidun alamayim, where we're judged for rain, and they're adding in also sukkah, Israel being, the center, the light, running the world. Okay, not in the anti-Semitic way, not in that way. Okay, but in the spiritual way of the vision. Okay, we good?
Yep.
Great. Now the question we always say, what about now that there's 2 days? Right, we got 2 days in Bavel. So what's the answer? Lamachar Mikra Hachinami. The next day, Mikra Hachinami Karinan. Read the same thing we read. Repeat. Rinse and repeat. Yeah.
Unless the first day of Shabbos, right? Or Sukkot's not the one where you had.
Yeah, so here we get the Rambam statement of it, just to see it. Pasukot b'shnei yamim harishonim kohen b'parshat Ma'odot u'maftir b'yom harishon hine yom ba'al Hashem u'v'yom hasheni kalon melech shlomo u'v'yom tovach kohen. Okay, we're gonna get there. Yep. Okay. Yeah. should we just get-
Sukkot is the if Sukkot, if Rishon Sukkot is Shabbos, we add, right? We call the add.
I think we
add
just add
the-
aliyot. I don't think we add.
We don't, okay, it's just on Pesach we add.
You'll see what
There's
I.
one of them we add a section called B'chorah.
Oh, no, we're going to
Um,
get to that. We're going to get to that. That's
okay.
a big three-way debate. We're about to get there. That's not this. We're going to get
Okay.
there. Hold that thought. Great. Now, what about the maftir? Afture my maftirin. So the Haftorah on the second day of Sukkot is from Malachim Ikalu Elamelech Shlomo. So what happened in this section? They all gathered to the king Shlomo called Ish Yisrael B'yerach ha'etanim b'chag hu ha'chodesh hashvi'i. They gathered during the moon of Etanim, which they're going by the old lunar month here, on the festival, which is the festival of the 7th month. And what did they do? All of Israel came, and the priest lifted the ark, the covenant. Yalu esaron Hashem v'yas oel moed v'yas kol klei kodesh shebo v'yalu esam konim, and they lifted all the ark of the covenant and all of the vessels. And they had sacrifices. They inaugurated, right? They put the Aron in the temple. They entered the Aron into the temple. Okay. So what does this add to Sukkot? Like,
Doesn't it so doesn't describe during the time of who is it? It's Malachim. Doesn't it describe what Shlomo HaMelech did essentially on Yom
on Sukkot, it's true. And what they're doing repeatedly now is in both of these Haftorahs is it's funny because Sukkot is a decentralized holiday at a hut, but in each of them, I mean that with all reverence. These days, if you don't speak with enough reverence, rabbis critique you on social media, the place of all reverence. But they're taking the holiday about your own private hut, and they're making it about the temple in Jerusalem, right? A sukkah and the temple really are pretty opposite. The temple is a grand religious structure, and the sukkah is a humble personal edifice. So
You're still supposed to join. It's still one of the Shlosh L'Golim.
Right. Okay. Right. So there's kind of I would say there's like a tension there, and instead of dealing with the tension, there's a way of kind of squaring the circle that occurs in rabbinic thought, where the sukkah becomes a symbol of the fallen temple, and the sukkah becomes like the Kodesh Kodashim in mystical thought, right? And the Ushpizin enter and that kind of thing. And in a sense, it's really, and even the halachas of sukkah, like the maximum height. What's the source of all of this? The source of all of it is related to where God comes down in the Mishkan, in the Gemara and Sukkah. They're like how far God never extends below 10 tefachim. So your Sukkah, has to be at least that high as a minimum height. So the source of the minimum height of a Sukkah means that it needs to include a place where God comes down to meet human beings. So that's what the Gemara and Sukkah says for the minimum height. People focus on the maximum height, but the minimum height is in a sense based on this temple idea. So, okay. So that's the other Haftorah. Good. Keep going. Ushar kol yemos hachag. Now, what about Chol HaMoed? Korim b'korbanos hachag. You read the sacrifice of that day.
I know I'm delaying you, Rabbi. Can I interrupt for 1 second?
I delay myself all the time. Yeah.
Okay. So before the Churban, everybody journeyed to Jerusalem, but they still lived in the sukkah, right? So I assume they built their sukkahs in Jerusalem, the ones who could make it. Is that correct or not correct?
I assume that's what happened.
Okay.
I mean,
So
that's
why-
what the
why do
halacha says should
So
happen.
why is the Haftorah that's chosen not? I don't know. It seems like the sukkah is the sukkah. It's a combination of the journey to Yerushalayim and the sukkah together. There should be some kind of a merging of those ideas, you would think. But anyway, that's how I would think anyway.
Yeah. But remember, the prophets were like, what was the prophetic interest? The prophetic interest in this was in the kind of messianic vision of it.
Okay.
Maybe that's kind of the answer. Ushar kol yemotach
Isn't that when they had
haKohen
the water thing also in the second day?
b'nisuch hamayim, right? Well, so we have that because we have the rain, right? We have the rain mentioned in the first half Torah that, whoever doesn't come won't have rain.
Okay.
Hold on one second.
And they don't do anything about the Arba.
You're right. The Arbat Haminim don't get mentioned at all. They're just left out entirely. Okay. Ushar Goyim Otachag, Korim B'Korban Otachag. The rest of the days, there's probably more to say, so please say it if you want. On the rest of the days, you just, the sacrifice of that day. Yom Tov Ha'achron Korin. Okay, so here we go. This is what you were talking about, Donnie. Yom Tov Ha'achron Korin Kol HaBechor Mitzvot V'chukim U'Bechor. Huh? So this is a weird formulation. It may be a kind of manuscript error that we have here. But let's just work with our manuscript and try to understand it, and then we'll talk about how many Rishonim don't have this text. We seem to be working from a corrupted text. On the last day of Sukkot, now what was the last day before there was a Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galias? The last day was what we would call Shmini Atzeres. So what do you read on Shmini Atzeres? The answer is Kol HaBechor Mitzvot V'chukim U'Bechor. Mitzvahs and laws and the firstborn. So this is a little strange. Umaftirin v'hi kechlos shlomo lemachar korin v'zos habracha maftirin ve'amot shlomo. So let's just see Rashi. It's probably yeah, here we go. We're going into Parish mode. Did it change on your screen as well?
I just went down in Safari. So which Rashi?
Okay.
Koren Kol HaBechor?
Yeah, so this Rashi, Korin Kol HaBechor, do people see it here?
I have it here.
Korin Kol HaBechor.
You can get it in. Just tap on that.
15, right?
Tap on the Hebrew.
Yep.
Go to commentary.
And then that's for
Rashi, it's translated.
Okay, so Rashi says the following thing. Korin Kol HaBechor. When it says read Kol HaBechor, what that means is, Ela shematchilin aser ta'aser. But you don't start a Kol HaBechor. Every firstborn that's born, the first shall be sanctified to God, Kol HaBechor, but rather begin a bit earlier, a few paragraphs earlier at aser ta'aser. You shall surely tithe. And why? Lefi sheyesh bo parsha mitzvot v'chukim harbe. Because if you read aser ta'aser, there are many, and maybe we'll open that up. That. Do you see Sfaria now on my thing?
I have Safari here. I have it here. So.
No, but what do you see on the screen share?
Is it Safari? I see.
No,
You're bringing up the right one. Yeah.
now it is.
Yeah, you're in Safari, and you're in the Torah, yeah.
I'm in the
You're
Torah. Yes, I'm in
in
the Torah. So,
Devarim. It's chest above. Now chest. No, now Yud Dalet. Yud Gimel. No, Tesvav.
I'm in Tedvav. You sure? Let's see.
That's where you are. I don't know.
Oh, you're telling me where I am. Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's what I see on your page.
okay, so Kala Bachor starts here. Kala Bachor. Everyone see this?
Yeah.
The Rashi says, but you don't go to Kala Bachor. You go earlier. You go to Aser to Aser because it has many mitzvot. So let's just go up to Aser to Aser. Aser to Aser. So we're a bunch higher. So what are these many mitzvot that Rashi talks about? Aser to Aser, 8 kol tfuat zerachas, you shall surely tithe. You shall eat the tithe before God in the place you shall choose in Jerusalem. Right, and if it's too great, then you can convert it to money and do a pidyon. And don't neglect the Levi. At the end of 3 years, when you finish the full 1, 2, and 3 year cycle of Maaser, Sheni, and Maaser Ani, you can, you'll about the tithes, feeding the Levi again, Shemitah, remission of debt. Don't cheat your brother, your fellow Jew. Listen to the voice of God. Make sure to give generously when you give charity. Give to whoever's in need. Don't cheat them because the Shemitah year is coming and the loans are going to be forgiven. If you sell a slave, make sure that you set them free nicely, like we were set for, free from Egypt. Okay, so that's Aser to Aser. Do you see what Rashi means? It's got a lot of mitzvot. It does.
Yep.
He's right. Now, the whole Torah has a lot of mitzvot, of course. You could go back ad infinitum. But what? So I just wanted to ask, like, why Aser to Aser? Why should you go earlier?
So that seems to be emphasizing how to treat the poor. That part.
Okay, so I think part of it's definitely about treating the poor. And Rashi also notes Aser to Aser lefi sheyesh be'ota parsha mitzvot v'chukim harbei hanehugot b'chag be'oto zman shu zman asif. So Rashi knows, right? And treating the poor, making sure you give the tithe, and making sure you give the Levi, and making sure you give generous charity, all of that stuff is pretty relevant for this holiday, which happens during the time of the harvest, the time where the poor need to gather food to their houses. Also, if you read Aser to Aser, you get, some years the Maaser is regular Maaser, but some years the Maaser Sheni is Maaser Ani. Instead, it goes to the poor person in years 3 and 6. Umitzvot naton titain, and you also get the mitzvah of you shall surely give charity. Upatoach tiftach, you should surely open up your hand. Anik to anik, and you must surely benefit the slave. Le'aved ivri, for a Jew, Israelite slave. V'shiluach chovshi, and send them out free. V'aved tavitenu, and how if they want to become a permanent. So you get all these rules which are relevant to this time of Sukkot.
Could it be? But is there a theme like this is the last theoretical last day of Sukkot in essence, and Sukkot is Chag HaSimcha, and so the poor, in order to make sure they have the Simcha, to make sure that it's emphasizing how to treat the poor. So
etc. You and the lady and the poor person and right. That's what the Torah says. So Rashi is kind of getting at that. Maybe he doesn't say that explicitly. He just says a lot of mitzvot that are applicable during this time, and by the way, a lot of other mitzvot. And you're adding to Rashi, which is always good territory to be in when you're kind of saying it better than Rashi. which is why we do Tuesday Night Talmud. It's not just a collection of random mitzvot. It's a collection of random mitzvot about mainly benefiting the poor. And the whole idea of Simcha and Sukkot is tied up with benefiting the poor. So it makes sense that at the end of Sukkot, and the end of the harvest, and the end of the festivals, you're going to read this passage, Aser to Aser. So when it says Kala B'chor, it means Aser to Aser. And if we go back and reread the Gemara, the way Rashi's reading the Gemara is read Kala B'chor, but not just Kala B'chor, the mitzvot, the chukim, u'b'chor. Do you see how he's reading it? Kala B'chor, the thing we call Kala B'chor, which really means all the mitzvot before it, the chukim before it, u'b'chor, and then read the B'chor that comes after it. So he's under, that's, do you see the way Rashi reads that in the Gemara? That the Gemara tells you to start Kala B'chor at Aser to Aser. Do you see how Rashi did that?
I lost my Rashi.
Okay, so look up
Does
the-
anyone understand what I'm saying, or am I talking to myself?
No.
On Facebook, anyone? Everyone understand what I'm saying? The Gemara says on the last day of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeret, read Kala B'chor. But then it says mitzvot v'chukimu b'chor. So Rashi's like, huh? And understands that to mean not Kala B'chor, but rather this Gemara is teaching us the mitzvot and the chukim that happen around that area of the Torah, which are really right before Kala B'chor in the parsha of Aser to Aser, and then u'b'chor, and then read the B'chor part 2, because you might have thought it ended at Aser to Aser. Kamash Malan Kala B'chor. You got to read that part too. Okay, now question. Rashi made an argument that we should do this on Sukkot because it's Chag HaAsif. But the question remains, what about the other times we read Kala B'chor? And what are the other times we read Kala B'chor?
Pesach and Shavuos.
Right, so I made a list. We read this on Shavuos on the
Second day.
second day. And
One of the days of Pesach.
we're in the second day of Shavuos. Right. Now, question. What about if Yantiv is Shabbos? What if Shmini Atzeret is Shabbos?
You
For
add
sure.
stuff before. You don't just make extra liyas. You begin earlier.
So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Hold on. So this is why things are a little.
Mhm.
Is it here?
Now in Israel, there is no second day of Shavuos.
I
So
wanted
do
the
they-
next.
But this is David, this is Talmud Bavli.
No, I understand, but we're talking about, just before we said, what is the last day of Sukkot in Israel? So
Right.
you can't go both ways. If we're merging Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeret, then we have to, that has to be the same, position.
Yeah.
So then Kol B'chor is not read if there's no second day of Shavuos.
Okay.
Just throwing it out there.
So let's just read this. Uvemakom she'osim shnei yamim tovim. Okay, so let's read about this. David's point. We're talking about Shmini Atzeret. So the assumption in the Shulchan Aruch is immediately that it's Israel. So Shacharit motzin shlosha sfarim. You take out 3 Torahs. Kohen bechad mivizos habrachat sofa Torah. One of them you read vizos habrachat to the end of the Torah. Uvasheni Bereshis adasher bar lakim masos. And the second you read Bereshis. Uvashlishi beyom hashmini atzeres tiyalechem kol malachat avodah lo ta'asu, etc. Maftir vahi acharei mot Moshe. And you do the maftir of after Moshe died, Joshua took over. You keep the continuity like we do on Simchas Torah. Imhu Shabbos. Now, what is this? V'korin be'echad chamisha beparshas re'eh mikol ha'bachor. You call on the first 5 from the parsha of re'eh until kol ha'bachor. Imhu Shabbos korin zayin matchilin aser ta'aser. What's going on here? How do I pull this out?
You want the Shulchan Aruch.
I know, that's why I'm reading there. That's why I got out of Rashi.
So the Shulchan Aruch points this thing. Okay, so normally there's this kind of debate. Do you start Kol HaBachor or Aser to Aser? And why would you think that on Shabbos you might need to start Aser to Aser, but on a regular day maybe you should do Kol HaBachor? What would be?
You
You
need more aliyahs.
aliyahs. You need more aliyahs on Shabbos, right? So maybe this whole Kol HaBachor thing, that Kol HaBachor is really Aser to Aser, started because they need more aliyahs. Because you need to get 7 aliyahs on Shabbos, so they went before. And so if that's what this is all about, that they need more aliyahs, and Rashi found nice reasons later and reread the Gemara or whatever, or maybe the Gemara's text amended, but then maybe you only do that on Shabbos. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch seems to suggest, right? Right, b'makom she'osin shnei yamim tovim motzim b'yom rishon ale shnei sfarim v'koren be'achad. On the 2-day galus, you take out only 2 Torahs on Shmini Atzeret, and in the first you read from Parshas Re'eh, starting with Kol HaBachor. What? Do you see where I am?
I'm just like looking at Safari where you are in the Shulchan Aruch. About the Shulchan Aruch.
Do you see my screen share or no?
Yeah, I was just looking at
it.
Is my screen sharing the right thing?
Yeah, it's there. It's good.
You all see the Shulchan Aruch here?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the Shulchan Aruch says, and I appreciate everyone doing this at 8:37 on a rainy Tuesday night. You get, I don't know about the next world, but I'm sure there's a reward for this. Okay, so right, the Shulchan Aruch seems to say normally you read starting at Kol HaBachor, not Aser to Aser, but Kol HaBachor. Imu Shabbos kohen zayin matchilin Aser to Aser. But if it's Shabbos, you have to call 7, and because you have to call 7, you start Aser to Aser. So the Shulchan Aruch sounds a little different than Rashi. He sounds like you only do call Aser to Aser if it's on Shabbos, which is what we do in general. So the general rule, you'll understand, is like the Shulchan Aruch here, which is that we read, whenever we're going to read Kol HaBachor Aser to Aser, we read Aser to Aser if it's Shabbos, because we need more aliyahs, and Kol HaBachor otherwise. But on Sukkot, on Shmini Atzeret itself, Anu Matchilin, so see here in the Magen Avram, for example, Rabbi Avram Gambener, his famous commentary, Anu, writing in Galicia, Matchilin Aser, we begin at Aser to Aser, Afilu Chal B'chol, even on the Chol, even if we don't need more aliyahs. Mipnei Shuzman Maestros, because it's the time that you give your Maaser. This is the time. It's Sukkot. This is the harvest. This is when you tithe. And so we read it now, even if it's Chol, even on Sukkot. V'yesh mekomosh shekoyin gam deches v'zos habracha v'hevi shem minhagim. Okay, fine. And you'll see this also in the Ber Heitev. Quoting the Minhagim, right? See the Gra, Maestros, same thing. Rashi Sham. You see the Gra here? There's on the Gaon. So he says, and this interpretation that we do it even if it's Chol is like Rashi. So the Shulchan Aruch has one psak, and Ashkenazim, do you see, follow a different psak? You understand this? The Shulchan Aruch is, you don't read Aser to Aser on Shmini Atzeres, you only read Kol HaBachor. But the Ashkenazim are all like, no, you do Aser to Aser. We have an old minhag because that's the time of the Maestros. And the Vilna Gaon says, and this is based on Rashi, V'chein lefi girsatenu b'Gemara sham mitzvot v'chukim u'bachor. And that is our girsa in the Gemara. The Vilna Gaon was very interested in finding the correct manuscript of the Gemara that says mitzvot v'chukim u'bachor. Meaning to say that the Gemara suggests that for Sukkot, you read all of it no matter what. Not like the Shulchan Aruch. So in other words, the Shulchan Aruch didn't have our Girsa of the Gemara system on the Gemara. The Shulchan Aruch, all of this was to get to this point. The Rav Yosef Karo had a different Girsa of the Gemara, which just said Kol HaBachor. It didn't say mitzvot v'chukim u'bachor, but Rashi's Girsa did. And so there's a difference in custom that either became manifest in two different versions of the Gemara or emerged from two different versions of the Gemara. Now, the one place where this got a little weird, what do you do on like Shavuos? First, another thing. Just see the Mishnah Berurah for a second, and then we'll move on. The Mishnah Berurah is here. It's the same thing we've heard repeatedly. Now, Omnam, this happened to us one year. Do you remember? I'm not going to say who was laning. Might have been me. Someone started Kol HaBachor and not Aser to Aser on Shmini Atzeret. I remember.
We're usually here. We're not
What?
here.
So
We're never here, so I don't remember.
Someone else jumped up mid Aliyah and said, no. You're supposed to start at Aser to Aser. And everyone looked at me and said, what do we do? And I opened the Mishnah Berurah, as I recall. And I was like, the Mishnah Berurah says you don't have to go back if you started to Kol HaBachor, because that's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. It's what Sfardim do. It's not that, right? So you're still okay. Now, one of the weird things is some people, and I'm going to go back to the Gemara now. I don't know where I put the Gemara, but here it is. Way back in the Gemara. Some of the Sidurim suggest that you should start Aser to Aser at other holidays too, like on Shavuos. But the Koren will note, the Koren says start at Kol HaBachor, but some start Aser to Aser. And the Art Scroll, for some reason, says start Aser to Aser. On Shavuos, it's Kol HaBachor during the week. In other words, because it's not the Zman of Aser to Aser. This thing that you read Aser to Aser even during the week is only on Shmini Atzeres. In other words, if you learn this sugya well, you will see that the instructions in the Sidurim we have are not precise. You'll see, if you remember the sugya through the entire festival season, you will see that whatever Sidur you're using, at some point, the instructions are not very precise, because they just kind of cite random minhagim to read Kol HaBachor or Aser to Aser, but they don't really explain why. Everyone kind of agrees that you do it on Shmini Atzeres, but for the other holidays, for Pesach and for Shavuos, if they happen during Chol, you always start Kol HaBachor, but some want to say that for Pesach, since it's like the last days, it's like the last days of Sukkot and whatever. In any event, does everyone understand the controlling principle? On Shabbos, it's Aser to Aser, and during the week, it's Kol HaBachor. The only time that's not true is during the week on Shmini Atzeret. If you're Ashkenazi, you read Aser to Aser, the longer parsha anyway, because those mitzvot are applicable at that time. That's the rule. We good?
Yep.
Okay.
Great. So that's one of the few debates that happens in these sugyas. Did you see how it was maybe even emerging from our girsa? Okay. Now we're getting to Purim. Wait. Okay, the maftir is Shlomo finishing to build the temple. Okay. L'machar korim v'zos habracha maftirin v'yamot shlomo. The next day, you read v'zot habracha on Simchas Torah, and the maftir is v'yamot shlomo. Note, they have a different maftir than us. What's our maftir on Simchas Torah?
Mafjan, I don't remember. No.
Maftir and Simchas Torah. What do we do after we finish the whole Torah? We do a maftir from
Oh, yeah. Is
the
it?
first parak of Yoshua. We just keep
Yoshua, yeah.
going. We just don't stop. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. That's the slogan, right? Try and keep people awake. So, but here they have a different thing because, of course, they didn't have Simchas Torah. They didn't have such a holiday at this point. In fact, this teaching that we're having is before the V'ha'idna, like, in other words, they have you just reading this, even during the triennial cycle, right? In other words, Eretz Yisrael had a triennial cycle and Bavel had a 1 year cycle, an annual cycle. So why, if it's, let's imagine you're in a triennial cycle. Let's imagine Amar Rav Huna, right? I'm in the wrong place. But still, it doesn't matter. My point will stand. No. Let's imagine that this teaching applies to the triennial cycle, because it does, right? In other words, we're kind of quoting Israeli traditions and then amending them with the Babylonian tradition. So let's phrase it this way, in a time where you're reading in 3 year cycles, and so you're not ending the Torah every year because you're only finishing it every 3 years, why would you read V'zos HaBracha and end the Torah on Simchas Torah? Does everyone understand the question?
They did that every year?
They did that. In other words, they'd read V'zos HaBracha even before Simchas Torah, and even when they had a triennial cycle and weren't necessarily finishing the Torah. So why did they do that if they weren't finishing the Torah? Like, they weren't there, they just jumped to there. Why did they do that?
Oh, no.
They have the Ron here. And did everyone understand the question?
Yes, I do. I don't know the answer, but I found the question.
So I'll give you the answer. The Ron.
Technically, Zos HaBracha doesn't actually finish the Torah.
It doesn't?
Isn't there the end? Wait. You know, you don't do Chazak at the end of Zos HaBracha. Well, you do you finish up with the call.
Where the Ron says the following. The Ron tells us that what is this? It's the end of the holidays. And why would you read V'zos HaBracha at the end of the holidays? Where are people going after the holidays?
Oh,
Home. And are they coming back to shul so quickly?
no, they're just
Well,
going.
in the times of
In times of the temple, that was 3 times a year.
right.
Okay, but after the temple, in the time where the Gemara still assumed the Jews were average people and not all tzaddikim, they assumed people weren't really coming back to shul so much after the holidays. In other words, there's a little bit of a farewell, like it is for a lot of people. Still, it's a little bit of a farewell. Not for any of you, but for the other people that don't come every morning. So if you're saying farewell to people, what's the nice way to say farewell to people for a while, to the people that just come for the holidays? These are the blessings that Moshe gave when he died. In other words, this is a farewell blessing departure. That's how it started, right? You're going home, you're going back, the holidays are over. you should be blessed. We'll bless every tribe. Now, look what Tosafot says. You see pre-Simchas Torah, before it emerged. And we're not giving a history of Simchas Torah here. There are a lot of interesting essays that have been written about it. We could do that for a shir one day. Maybe one Christmas Eve we'll do that, even though it's not really relevant. The Machar, Karinan Vizos HaBracha, Umaftir V'Yamot Shlomo. The Haftorah is this Haftorah about Shlomo and not Yoshua. V'yesh Mekomos Shenagu Laftir B'Vihi Achrei Mos Moshe, says Tosafos. There are these places where they start doing the Haftorah Yoshua. And Simchas Torah is like starting to emerge, say the Bali Tosafos. V'shibushu, it's all messed up. It's not right. It's all confused. What are these people doing? Sharia Shas Yenomerkin. That's not what the Talmud says Tosafot. It's not what it says in my Talmud. V'yesh Omrim Shrav Haigaon Tikin Lomar Vahi Achrei Mos Moshe. And some say Rav Haigaon started this custom. Tosafos. So the defenders of this tradition that no, when you finish Vizos HaBracha. Now, of course, Rav Haigaon was in Bavel where they were reading annually, right? So they're reading the Torah annually and they're finishing it already every year around this time. So it makes sense that Rav Haigaon would institute the custom to pick up where you left off. Some say that about Einan Yodinas Ramai Shana Seder Ashas. But we have no idea why Rav Haigaon would change from what the Talmud says. They had no idea, but we know. Rav Haigaon prophetically saw that the holiday of Simchas Torah would emerge in 2022. People would dance in circles for hours, right? He knew. So in other words, the annual cycle had started and it made sense to already begin to develop a theme of continuity. So this Tosafot is particularly interesting to me because it's just a remnant of the pre-Simchas Torah commentary, right? They didn't have that day. Not only don't they call it that, but
you're saying that in Europe of the 13th century, they didn't have a ninth day of Simchas Torah?
They had a holiday. They read the Torah. They didn't call it Simchas Torah.
But there was no specific thing.
It was just Shmini Atzeret times 2.
Oh, okay.
And so it wasn't called Simchas Torah, and they might have finished the Torah, but they certainly didn't dance or do hakafos, and they didn't do the Haftorah. And even the Haftorah custom that was emerging to pick up, the Tosafos are objecting. It is a change from the Shas, and that's not correct.
At what point did Simchas Torah become Simchas Torah?
When did does anyone want to answer that question? When did Simchas Torah become Simchas Torah?
Late Middle Ages in Ashkenaz.
Late Middle Ages in Ashkenaz, there already began to become these. So originally in Ashkenaz, you'll note, some places, according to the historians, mourned. Because you read about the death of Moshe, and it's like pretty sad. I mean, a lot of people cry every year in shul. It's the one time people cry in shul is when Moshe dies. Still, people, I'm told, used to cry in Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, but now they don't mainly. But when you read about Moshe's death, and if you look around, I like to look around every year, there are definitely several people reaching for tissues. You read the whole Torah, Moshe dies, it's very emotional. It was a day of mourning in some communities, as historians will point out, and some of the Ashkenazic middle sources there will note. But in other communities, there came to be this celebration of starting the Torah again, right? Of reading Bereshis again. You're already in the Gemara, you finish and you read Bereshis. So this idea of continuity and of the cycle of the year. And we said, even just reading Vizot HaBracha is like blessing for people going home, right? It's like you made it through the holidays. It's a pretty festive it's a grand finale. It's the word I'm looking for. And so it makes sense that you want to have a celebration. So they started to honor people by calling them to the Torah in particular ways. By the way, I do think, I read an essay and I think it's pretty compelling that early on, they may have called the person that finished the Torah the Chatam HaTorah, the finisher of the Torah, and they may have at some point kind of just misheard or substituted Chatan Torah for Chatam Torah. The finisher of the Torah became the groom of the Torah. And of course, you may know that a Chatan, there were rishuyot in Ashkenaz. If you go to like oldpiyut.org.il or something like that, or realllyoldpiyut.org.il, it's an Israeli site that catalogs really old piyutim. It's a fun place. Every parsha had, for whoever had an ufruf that week, had a poem. So, and sometimes they're original poems, but if your ufruf was Parshas Noach, there was a poem for Noach that extolled you when you were a chassan and then you got called up. So, and they had those also for Vizosa, Bracha, and Bracious. In other words, this wasn't, they had it for every parsha in case you had an ufruf, but maybe sometimes they wrote original ones. And so once they were calling up people to finish the Torah and start the Torah and the kind of Chatan Torah, so they'd read the Rishos, the piyut for the ufruf. You know, they kind of made it into a thing. And once they did that, so that then it became a celebration. And then the Luriana Kabbalists got a hold of it. Right? Once it's already a celebration. And
I can see
Arian,
another reason for making a celebration.
yeah.
If you started in Europe in the Middle Ages, you know, life was so hard for the Jews.
You got through that year.
It was so hard for Jews in Middle Age Europe that perhaps you know, you've got the Yom season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and now you're going to have to go back to your miserable life. So rather than just end it with a sad thing and go back to your miserable life, let's end it with a real super duper party and then go back to our miserable life.
Yeah. I mean, life is hard in Ashkenaz, and
What?
life was hard in Ashkenaz.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no doubt. At many points. And in a million different places, you know, whether it was
Right.
Cossacks or Russians, whatever, you know. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit about Simchas Torah. We could get into more detail about the who's and what's of it at some point. Umaftirim ve'amot Shlomo, and the Haftorah is ve'amot Shlomo. And by the way, in the Haftorah ve'amot Shlomo, it's the tefillah of Shlomo Melech at the time of the Hanukkah Tabayit, at the time that the temple is erected. Maybe we'll just read a little more. Rav Huna Amarav. Rav Huna quotes the great Tana Amora border figure Rav. Shabbos shechalios b'cholos hamoed bein b'pesach bein b'sukkos. We do Shabbos chol hamoed, whether it's Pesach or it's Sukkos. Mikra Karinan Re'eh. You read from Parshas Re'eh. Re'eh ata omer Eli. Not Re'eh in Devarim, right? Re'eh in Devarim is Kol HaBachar Natir Saser, but here Re'eh ata, as opposed to that Re'eh. So what is that? Ve'omer Moshe L'Shem Re'eh ata omer Eli Ha'al et ha'amazeh v'yata lo hodetani eta shetshach imi v'ata amarti yadeticha b'shiva gam atzaticha mi'enai. So what is this? Where's this section happening? We just read it.
Yeah, this says, yeah, it's in Shemos someplace, and near the end of Shemos.
Right, and he says right after the Egel. It's talking about forgiveness.
Okay.
Right. Now, why do we read this on Shabbos? I have no idea. So I'm relying on you to answer the question. Why do we read this on Shabbos?
I have no idea.
I mean, you can always relate anything to anything, but why this? Because what does it mention at the end? So I think if we go past where we are, we'll see that it goes, let me pull it out. What's it going to mention? Oh, that's not how I want to do it. Next chapter. Kol Peter Rechem. And then it's going to say, what do you need to do? Observe the holidays. You need to observe Shabbos, 6 days you work, but you do not harvest on the 7th day, and you observe the Shalosh Regalim. So because it ends by saying observe Shabbos and observe the Shalosh Regalim, this makes sense for Shabbos Chol HaMoed. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And then I think it ends those I think that's the end of the holiday reading, right? So okay. We'll take just one more minute to make a little progress, then we'll end. That's what you read. Afturei b'Pesach, Hatzmotei v'Shot. On Pesach, the Haftorah for Shabbos Chol HaMoed is Ezekiel's Valley of the Dry Bones. Uva Sukkos, Biom Ba Gog. And on Sukkot, it's the war of Gog and Magog. So what's with the Ezekiel end times, Shabbos Chol HaMoed? Yeah, it's like heavy for Shabbos. You got the war of Gog and Magog, the resurrection of the dry bones. And we'll end on that note. Someone can give me a reason. So the Torah quotes quotes Rav Hai-Gon, the same Rav Hai-Gon that apparently instituted to change the Simchas Torah, Haftorah. The Torah quotes Rav Hai-Gon that Hatzmotei v'Shot Kabbalahu bi'adenu. We have a tradition that when will these dry bones be revived?
I guess it must be Sukkot. Shmini
Uh,
Atzeres or whatever.
Try the other holiday, Pesach.
Yeah.
So, but Pesach, we read the dry bones because in Nisan, Rav Hai-Gon said, is when this prophecy is going to occur. And of course, that makes sense. Understood in that way, Chazal are understanding that the dry bones prophecy is a rehash or a fan fiction account of Passover, right? In other words, the first Passover was from Egypt, and the Valley of the Dry Bones is a messianic redemption of some future redemption. Just like we were redeemed in Nisan, in the future will also be redeemed in Nisan, says the Gemara. And why Gog Umagog on Sukkot?
Is that when the end is supposed to come?
That must be when the end is supposed to come. So let's see. Rav Hai-Gon says, Kabbalah hui bi'adenu shemilchama zotia b'sof chodesh Tishrei, that this will be towards the end of the month of Tishrei. So there are these Gaonic traditions. The summary is Rav Hai-Gon is passing on a series of Gaonic traditions. It's not his idea. It's Kabbalah hu bi'adenu. We have
When did
received,
Hai-Gon, around 1000?
I think earlier than that a little bit, right? But we can check this as a verifiable fact.
No, don't worry about it.
No, we must. We'll conclude on that note. Oh, no, born in 939 and died in 1038.
I was close.
Oh, very close.
Born
He
in
was the last
939,
of the Gaonim.
died in 1038.
I thought I knew.
He was 99 years old.
Mhm.
Wow.
In Pumbedita.
Okay. Cool.
Yes. He died, he lived in Pumbedita, which is Fallujah. People know Fallujah because of the war.
Except by then, Pupadina had moved to Baghdad. If he's referring to the yeshiva, it moved to
Moved to Baghdad, right. I think
which must be what it means.
it must be, right, not actually. Okay, good point. So anyway, Rav Hai-Gon says we have a tradition that, and this Gemara is reflecting that tradition, that these haftorahs are reflecting those traditions, that these occurrences are going to occur in those seasons. There are probably other reasons you could give, but we'll take the Kabbalah hu bi'adenu. So we'll end there. Next time, we're so close now. We'll do Hanukkah. next time we'll start with Hanukkah and Purim. What are the Torah readings on Hanukkah and Purim? And then we'll turn the page. We'll turn the page. We have two more. We have one Amud and like a few lines left. So will we finish it next time? Not at my rate, but it doesn't matter. We're learning things. So today, what did we learn? We learned about this whole Kol
That's
HaBachor
right.
thing.
It's not a competition.
Yeah, so I mean, we were trying to learn how Chazal viewed these things or how the Gemara is viewing these holidays through the readings they choose. We also learned about this whole debate about Kol HaBachor and Shabbos and Aser Taser, but maybe you read the longer one you'd normally read on Shabbos, even during Chol, if it's during the season. And then we also started to get into these Haftorahs for Shabbos Chol HaMoed, and the Torah reading for Shabbos Chol HaMoed. And my hope is that the next time you see these readings, the Haftorahs, the regular Torah readings, whatever, it'll make a little more sense. We also saw the Tosafos. That's something else we did about Simchas Torah. What's the Simchas Torah that's starting? So some of the Balitas, what's this Haftorah change from the Gemara? You can't change the Haftorah from the Gemara, but then, of course, it sounds like Rav Hai Gaon did, and we follow that. And that, by the way, just so you remember on that issue, is how the Rambam ruled. Right, the Rambam ruled that way. That on Simchas Torah you read by, you read from Yeshua. So the Rambam followed the rulings of the Gaonim, and so do we in Ashkenaz. We don't follow the ruling of the Balei Tosfos in this. So that'll conclude tonight's edition of Tuesday Night Talmud. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me stop the recording. If you hold on 1 second, let's see, how do I stop the 1 second and the recording?